This is a short video on how to cut a mat, and I'm using the mat that I just marked in my video on how to make a mat marker. And this is a C&H mat cutter that I've had since 1979, still works great, and so I'll show you on this machine. And a couple things to always remember is you always want to cut the mat into another mat so that you get a nice crisp beveled edge. So I always lay a mat underneath the mat I'm cutting, and I cut many mats a day, and they're usually all sorts of different size borders, so I like to mark the mats and cut them this way because I have so many different borders. If I was using the bar stop, I would spend more time changing the bar stop than I would marking the mats. But if I had like a whole bunch of mats that are all the same border, then I would use the stop. So this is how to do it when you've used a mat marker. And what I do is bring the blade down and make sure I'm splitting the pencil line, and then just make a nice smooth cut. And then I move the board I'm cutting into up about 1/4 of an inch, and then make the next cut. And I kind of use my left hand like a spider doing push-ups to keep the weight off the mat while I'm adjusting where it's at. And there's two huge important things to remember. Do not put any weight on the bar when you're cutting the mat. Keep your left hand and your body off of the bar, because it kind of bends the rail that the mat cutting block goes on, and you'll have all sorts of trouble with it sliding and everything. So do not put any weight on the bar here. And then you learn when to dive into the mat and when to pull out of the mat, so that the ideal situation is where you have no undercuts or no overcuts. And if you have an undercut, you can take the mat and carefully leave the opening in there, and then run a razor blade down the mat to cut it free. In fact, I'll do that on this one, where I'll purposely have an undercut so you can see how the undercut could be taken out. So on this one, I'm going to dive the blade in way back, and now it will be not cut in that one spot, so it's not going to come out. But you have to hold the mat carefully and turn it over so that the bevels stay together, because you don't want it to rip out of there with its own weight dropping it out. Now, to cut the mat free and release the whole board, you drop a razor blade into the bevel, and you keep your hands off of it so you see the angle that you need. Because if you don't have it in the exact same angle, you're going to see where you've cut it free. And this one I did a huge undercut, which is a very rare thing to happen for me after 45 years of doing this. And so you see, you just kind of gently lay the razor blade in, take your hand off, and make that final cut, and then the mat comes free. And if you're just starting out, in order to get a lot of practice on when to dive the blade in and when to pull it out, I recommend taking a 40 by 60 mat board, and that's what I've got over here. and starting with the whole sheet and marking like 3.5 inches and cutting that mat out, and then you take the piece that came out of the center and you take that and mark that 3.25, cut that mat, and then to take the piece that came out of the center of that, mark that 3 inches and cut it, and then take the piece that came out of the center of that, mark that 2.5 inches, and then the final one, I'd mark that piece at 2 inches. And what you're left with is just this little tiny piece in the center, which is hard to make a mat out of. But I calculated out if you took one mat and did that, you'd end up with $116 worth of mats that you've cut out of one mat. And if you're an artist doing your own artwork, you could make stuff any size you want. So this would be a very efficient, economical way to make a whole bunch of mats out of one mat. And of course you can adjust the borders yourself. If you want narrower borders, you'd get more mats, or wider borders, you'd get fewer mats. And I glued a string to this and hung it up like a big mobile, or mobile, I guess is the way you pronounce that. And it was kind of fun to do that. And by the time you're done with one mat, with making 5 mats out of one, you should be a pretty proficient mat cutter. Another thing I wanted to show you is that when I'm sliding my under mat in behind the mat I'm cutting, I have permanently glued down paper with lines in it so that I move everything up a half a line that under mat, so I don't end up having like half an inch between on one and 1/8 on another. And it's a very efficient way to use that under mat when you're keeping careful track of how far you're raising the under mat, so you get hundreds of little lines on one mat and you don't go through a ton of under mats doing that. And if you go through the same line you've already cut, you usually get a rougher edge of your bevel. And that's been a big help over the years. This poor cutter is older than most people watching this video, but I can still cut perfect mats with it.